Brand new tonight, a Katu investigation found there are still nearly 20,000 sex offenders living in Oregon without risk assessments required by state law. And that means the state doesn't know how dangerous they are. We first highlighted this problem in 2023. Good evening. Thanks for joining us for Katu News at 6. I'm Deborah Knapp.
And I'm Steve Dunn. Katu investigator Wright Gazaway found the backlog hasn't gotten much better. Wright joins us from the live desk now. You're learning the parole board wants to remove a deadline for the agency to finish its job.
Yeah, one proposal gets rid of that deadline to classify every sex offender by the end of 2026. Another proposed change limits who the state needs to classify by the end of next year. The parole board has long said it cannot do its job without more employees and money.
I think the state should be sharing every piece of information that's relevant to situations.
Jane Mendoza and Courtney Gelbrick reached out to Katu Investigates after seeing our story from 2023. At the time, thousands of unclassified sex offenders lived in Oregon.
What have you learned about this as you've been digging into this?
At the end of the day, how broken the system is for the communities and for families.
A change in state law in 2013 created this backlog. It forced the state's parole board to classify thousands of sex offenders with a new assessment. 2 years later, the backlog has hardly changed. In 2023, the state reported 20,122 unclassified sex offenders. In 2025, our investigation found the number is 18,259. Turns out one of those unclassified sex offenders was part of their community. The person moved from another state where he was classified as a level 3 sex offender.
And if we continue at the rate that we're at, it's going to take 20 years.
Republican Senator Cedric Hayden. There is still a backlog of these unclassified sex offenders. Does that frustrate you as a lawmaker?
Yes, it's frustrating. For years we've worked on this subject, and the problem is that the parole board is not catching up.
The state blames the backlog on low staffing and priorities to classify sex offenders getting out of prison or moving into Oregon. Previous efforts to add staffing and money to the parole board have failed. Senator Hayden's office sponsored legislation after we told them about this issue with Courtney and Jane. It would require Oregon to accept classification levels in other states.
This bill that we're putting forward this session would actually say that the parole board has to accept that or something similar to put them into our categories. And then if that person wants their due process to appeal it, give them a process to do that.
However, the state and Governor Tina Kotek have other solutions. Senate Bill 821 outlines one change. It removes the December 2026 deadline. The other, Senate Bill 820, limits the historical sex offenders who need to be classified to people with 2 or more sex crimes convictions, people getting out of prison, or offenders who are under 35 years old on January 1st, 2026. A spokesperson for the governor tells Katu, quote, "The governor was disappointed the legislature did not appropriate the funds the Oregon Board of Parole and Post-Prison Supervision needed in 2023 to address the backlog." She continues to push for adequate funding and statutory changes so the board can assess the highest risk offenders and ensure Oregonians feel safe in their communities. Jane and Courtney say the state should prioritize getting this done.
Until you have a conversation with someone about this, you don't understand the gravity and how serious it is and how much of a backlog it is.
A backlog that could take years to finish without major changes by the state. Senator Hayden says the concepts from the parole board make Oregon a, quote, sanctuary state for sex offenders. The parole board says it allows them to focus on the most dangerous offenders. At the live desk, Wright Gazaway, Katu News.
Thanks, Wright.